For tonight's speaker, we welcome Deborah Craig. Deborah is the director and producer of Sally. She is an award-winning documentary director and producer whose films use compelling personal stories to raise awareness about the challenges and strengths of underrepresented communities. Her work has played at LGBTQ+ women's and documentary film festivals in the US and internationally. Deborah's most recent short, A Great Ride, is a 33-minute documentary film about lesbians and aging. It premiered at the Frameline LGBTQ Film Festival in San Francisco in 2018, was picked up for distribution by Frameline, has screened at over 50 film festivals around the globe, and has won multiple awards. Sally is her first feature-length documentary. Deborah has a BA in history from Columbia University, did undergraduate work in photography at California College of the Arts, and has a Master of Public Health from San Francisco State University, where she currently teaches in the Public Health Department. Without further ado, Deborah Craig.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I am delighted to be here and especially delighted to learn more about what the Rotary Club does, especially because of the challenging times we find ourselves in. It is so encouraging and uplifting to learn more about groups of people who are interested in service, interested in setting politics aside, and interested in really just reaching out and helping people. And when you were talking about the aims of your club and the good works that your clubs are doing, I just was thinking immediately about Sally because to my knowledge, Sally was never in a Rotary club, but Sally would have been perfect Rotary club material. She always was concerned about other people, was interested in helping other people, was cared about justice, cared about the little guy and the little woman, and cared about connecting with people. I'm hoping you've watched the film, and if you haven't had a chance to watch it yet, then hopefully you'll be able to watch it after this. Sally Gearhart was a sort of a larger than life phenomenon in the lesbian community, particularly in San Francisco and California, and also sort of a paradox because she was sort of a larger than life phenomenon that when we were working on this film, we would encounter people who were said to us, "Oh my God, Sally Gearhart, she's amazing. I know her from the 70s, or I know her from fighting the anti-gay Briggs Initiative, or I know her from San Francisco State University Women's Studies." And then a lot of people we encountered said, "Who's Sally Gearhart? Never heard of her." And a lot of folks who then felt a little bit embarrassed about not knowing who she was because um, in some ways, as we try to show in the film, she was really key to moving gay rights forward at a critical point in time. So what I always tell people is it's wonderful if you know who Sally Gearhart is, and if you've never heard of her, don't then watch the film and get to know somebody who's brilliant, engaging, full of fun, full of energy, and full of paradoxes and contradictions as well. So very interesting and complicated human being. And the other thing is that when I first met Sally, I did not know that much about her. So that's what I always tell people who are like, "Oh, I feel so badly. I didn't know about her." It's like, I didn't really either. So I met Sally completely by happenstance. I have a complicated background myself. I have an undergraduate degree in history. I have sort of about three-quarters of a degree in photography, and all as I'm a musician. I've been a drummer since I was 11, so I've always had an interest in the arts my whole life, and I've always been trying to be practical because it's very hard to earn a living in the arts. And so I went back to graduate school in an effort to be practical. I went back to graduate school later in life. I went to San Francisco State and I got a master's degree in public health. And then I started teaching the public health department at San Francisco State. And I was working with a colleague, and I also started making film because I'm, as my partner says, I'm incurably impractical. So I went back to graduate school to be practical, and they had a film program associated with the public health department. So I immediately started making short films. A colleague of mine back in the day got a big grant to study lesbian health, and she brought me on board to help with the project. And we were looking at the health of lesbians over 40, and a lot of the women in our study groups and our focus groups, and a lot of the women we were interviewing were over 50 and over 60 and over 70 and were fantastic, amazing people who had great stories to tell, a lot of wisdom, and had lived long and interesting lives. And because I had been making short films, I thought, wow, this is an interesting study, but I really want to do a documentary film about this. And I was motivated partly because I had seen a film that is worth checking out if you're interested. Came out maybe 8 or 10 years ago at this point, or a little bit more. It's called Gen Silent, and it portrays the real and heartbreaking phenomenon of gays and lesbians having to go back into the closet as they age when they're living in an environment that is not gay friendly or not friendly or not inclusive or not open. And unfortunately, this is a real phenomenon, and especially with what's happening now and sort of the backlash, especially against the trans community, but the gay community as well. This is a reality that some gay people are contending with when they're older. Um, so that film, Gen Silent, is really worth checking out for that reason. I also not only wanted to make a film because I was meeting such interesting older lesbians, but I also wanted to kind of counter the message in Gen Silent because I was meeting that film is has some women in it, but it's more about men than women. And that film um, um, shows this idea of people having to go back in the closet. And I was meeting so many older lesbians who were out, who were comfortable in their own skin, and were really, to me, seemed like role models for aging, of keeping active and keeping engaged and keeping, um, 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 a part of important communities in their life. So I wanted to do that in that film. I really wanted to show uh, gay people aging and out and comfortable in their own skin, accepted by their communities, and really role models for aging, not just for other gay people, but for everybody in general. How do we age in a healthy way? I mean, I'm in public health. How do you age in a healthy way? Um, don't smoke or cut back on smoking. Don't drink too much. Eat in general healthy food and spend time with your friends. And spending time with your friends is up at the top of the list of what's important for healthy aging. So I was really so interested in showing that. I was meeting people from the health study we were working on, and then somebody in the health study told me, "Oh, you're interested in lesbians and aging? Well, I know somebody who lives in Northern California on women's land, and she's in her 80s and she still cuts her own firewood with a chainsaw." And I said, "Oh my God, I really want to meet this woman." First of all, I knew about women's land and women's kind of back to the land communities, but I thought those were more in the 70s and 80s, and I really didn't know that they were still around in 2014 when I was working on this film. And second of all, the visual of an octogenarian woman with a chainsaw cutting her own firewood was like, I really want to see this on film. So I got an introduction. I went up and I met Sally. I didn't know this was all I knew was she was an octogenarian living in the woods on women's land. All I knew was she cut firewood with a chainsaw. I didn't really even remember hearing her last name when I was she was first mentioned to me. I just remember hearing, um, that I remember hearing you would like to meet her if you're interested in lesbians and aging. Then when I met her, She was very charismatic and dynamic and lively and full of energy. And B, I just very gradually started to connect the dots. Oh, this is Sally Gearhart, who was in the film Word Is Out, who, if you haven't seen that, that's a classic gay film from the 70s, probably 1977 or something, that was one of the very first films normalizing gay people and just showing gay people as happy, well-adjusted, living their lives. And she was a key person in that film. And then I realized, oh, this is the Sally Gearhart who fought side by side with Harvey Milk to defeat the Briggs Initiative. And that was depicted in the film The Times of Harvey Milk by Rob Epstein. And so she was really an incredible leader in this fight. You know, there was a wave of anti-gay initiatives in the 70s, and there was one in California called the Briggs Initiative, which would have outlawed gay people of being teachers or being involved in public education in any capacity from kindergarten to graduate school, whether teaching or working. And so Sally was at the forefront of the fight against that initiative. So little by little, as I got to know this woman, I realized not only is she very charismatic and is fantastic on camera, but boy, she really had all these incredible accomplishments back in the day, back in the 70s and the 80s. She also co-founded one of the San Francisco State Women's Studies program. There didn't used to be women's studies. You know, young people now think women's studies, of course, I can major in women's studies or sociology or finance. There didn't used to be any such thing. In fact, if you took sociology or history or English literature, you wouldn't learn anything about women. And so Sally was part of a group of women at San Francisco State who collectively formed a women's studies program. And that was one of the very first in the country. There was also one, I think, maybe in Sonoma State and one in San Diego State. So in all these ways, I was gradually learning not only was this an important person to talk to about what it was like to age as a lesbian, but also that she was somebody important that we and that more people should know about. And so I came to really see her as somebody. We talk a lot about, you know, there was a movie called Hidden Figures about these incredible women who were involved in doing mathematics. I believe it was for NASA back in the day, never got credit. Or there's a movie about Dolores Huerta, who was a key figure in the farm workers' rights movement. And Cesar Chavez got most of the credit. So there's so many women who don't get credit, so many gay people who don't get credit. And I really started to see Sally as one of those people. And so as I was working on this film about lesbians and aging, people were telling me, oh, just do a film about Sally, just do a film about Sally. I was like, no, I need to finish this film about lesbians on aging. We got it out there. In 2018, we got it out into the world. It was at Frameline. It was at a lot of film festivals. And then immediately we started working on a film about Sally. Okay. What is very good, and I tell this people this a lot, is that I had never, so my short film about lesbians and aging, anybody can reach out to me if they're interested, and I can tell you how to find it. And that was about a half an hour long, and it took 4 years. Okay, so film takes a long time and takes a lot of money. Random guess that cost about 40 plus $1,000 to make. So if you're thinking about being a filmmaker, come talk to me. I'll tell you. I recommend against it. Maybe go be a CPA or something, or go work in tech or AI, right? Um, so I was taking on this new project. I was very fortunate to have a couple of friends who said, "We will do it with you." They had had lifelong careers in television and film. So one of them is a producer, one of them's a producer and an editor, and we started right away on this Sally film because we felt her story was so compelling and because there was nobody else there to tell her story. People are not stepping, Hollywood producers are not stepping up to tell the stories of radical lesbians, okay? They're not like, oh, yes, this is going to be a blockbuster. And so we felt a sense of urgency for a variety of reasons. We just happened to be there and be lucky enough to forge a good connection with her. I was able to find these two friends who said, "Yes, we'll do it with you," because I told them I'm not in a position to do it on my own. And we felt a special sense of urgency because Sally was aging. Okay. And so she was already losing her hearing. And if you see from the film, sometimes she can't hear that much. Sometimes she struggles with her memory. When I met her, she was already about 83. And so when I started filming her, she was 83 or 84. We filmed her until the end of her life. And when she was struggling with her memory and struggling with her hearing and struggling with her stamina, we would just spend time with her and really, really try to be as compassionate, as sensitive as we could be. Are you up for filming? If you're not, go take a nap. We'll go film somebody else. We'll go, film some B-roll. There was always a cat or a dog or people coming in and out. Or so we really tried to be especially sensitive to taking care of her as we filmed her. Um, the other thing that you might be interested in, there's a couple of things I'm going to tell you about. One is I'll talk to you a little bit about the importance of how we laid the film out. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about how we found all the people in the film. Because if you've watched the film, you'll notice there are a lot of people in this film. And that's one of the reasons it was so time consuming, aside from COVID, which shut us down for at least a year and a half. We really it was like detective work to do this film. So that was detective work in an exciting way, and detective work sometimes in a frustrating way, or maybe not even frustrating way, but time-consuming way and challenging way. So partly just because that's how stories are told, and partly because Sally was having some cognitive decline, we figured we need to tell her story through other people's eyes as well. And so that became a lot of sleuthing on our part. So we met some of her friends from her Women's Land community and started filming them. And then we met and we started figuring out Sally had all these different periods in her life. So I mentioned the Dolores Huerta film. Dolores Huerta had one focus her whole life. Sally Gearhart had so many interests, and she grew up in Virginia, and she lived in Texas, and she lived in San Francisco, and she lived in Willits, and she was an activist, and she was a teacher, and she was an academic, and she wrote fantasy novels. And so there were so many things. She lived in so many different places. We really wanted to try to reflect all of those different things. So those things both affected, who we interviewed, how we found them, and how we structured the film. So I was very, very conscious the whole time we were making the film. One, I mean, Sally was very bright, charming, and energetic. And so she compensated for her cognitive decline. She recognized all of her own friends right away. She didn't always recognize me, but she was always present. So sometimes when people have cognitive decline, it's like they're not there. Sally was absolutely not that. She was always 110% there and wanted to connect and wanted to participate and wanted to be there. That's one of the things that was so compelling about her. But I also met her late in life and wanted to tell her story. I guess I don't know if this is a strange way to say it, but in a more feminist way, like not just her, not just putting her up on a pedestal, but how did she appear in other people's eyes? And so then we were on this big search to look at um, what were her important interests and what were the important locations in her life. So she was born in a little town in Virginia, and very conservative, small town. Grew up in the church. Most people didn't know that much about that, but we felt like it's important to understand who she was. So we ended up eventually connecting with a half brother she had and going to Virginia and interviewing her half brother, who was very warm and welcoming and very conservative. And he hasn't seen the film yet, and I'm not sure he'd be comfortable with it. But it gave us a feeling for where she was from. Okay, and that felt so. And we were trying to like touch on her interests, touch on her accomplishments, and touch on the locations that made her who she was. So we literally were in her brother still lives, her half brother still lives in the town next door to where she grew up. And you drive through the town, and when we were there, there was still the Confederate statue there. So, okay, that tells you that's where she came from. And that helps you understand, wow, this woman underwent such an incredible transformation to become this really strong, fierce fighter for, LGBTQ rights. Okay. But she was also very, very proud until the end of her life of her Southern heritage and identified with it and loved to bring on the Southern drawl and, pretend to be a Southern belle, etc. And that kind of warmth and desire to connect with people. I think that really was part of her culture. And a very kind of a funny aside, but Sally, was this woman who lived on women's land and, was kind of this crunchy granola person. She ate only junk food. Okay. When I first went up there, I thought, okay, it's going to be, salads and whole wheat bread. No, she ate, bacon, mashed potatoes, Pepperidge Farm cookies. And I don't know, but I think that was her cultural food, you know. Okay, so we felt very, very pleased to be able to go to Virginia. Another key part of her life was that she lived in Texas for about 15 years. After she grew up in Virginia, she went to Sweetbriar College in Virginia, and then she went to graduate school several places and then taught in Texas. She was very, very, very closeted in Texas. It was the 60s. It was Texas. She was teaching several different places. The place she taught for the longest was called Texas Lutheran College. So that kind of tells you right off the bat. This is not a safe place to be out. So she was very, very closeted and faced a lot of challenges there. I think she had a rewarding career, a good circle of friends. We were able to find some friends of hers from back then and interviewed them in the film. So again, we felt very, very happy. Texas is represented. So Virginia's represented, Texas represented. The fact that Sally used to be conservative and was deeply Christian is represented. The fact that she had to be closeted, she didn't come out of the closet until she was 40, okay, because she didn't feel safe. So here's somebody who clearly was a very brilliant, strong, powerful woman, and she didn't feel safe to come out. And and for those of you who have seen the film, you'll see why she ended up. She had a good thing going in Texas. She had tenure. She was a very popular teacher. She thought communications. She thought theater, and she left all of that and moved to San Francisco, barely knowing anybody, kind of taking a leap because she got to a point. First of all, there were threats of blackmail where she was in Texas. And second of all, she just felt an urgency to become who she was. So she and it shows that in the film as she comes to San Francisco and then she comes out like gangbusters and she's got a motorcycle, she's driving all over. She's immediately completely engaged in the gay scene, in gay politics, in gay social life, and then starts teaching again and immediately gets very actively involved in the San Francisco State. And San Francisco State was a very radical place. They had just had a huge student strike there a few years before she came, and she was coming. So she was almost like a butterfly being born, of out of her Southern upbringing, which gave her all of these wonderful things that were part of her and stayed part of her, but that constrained her. And then she came to San Francisco and was really able to come into her own. So we really wanted to show that in the film as well. And let's see, what else can I tell you? So we worked our way back. So I was very concerned. We have both teachers and students from San Francisco State. We have teachers and students from Texas Lutheran College, again, to show what that was like. From Virginia, we have her brother representing and one of her oldest friends who she met in summer camp in Virginia, who tells us the Virginia story. And then when we come to San Francisco, we interview folks we were very um, conscious. We need somebody to talk about the Briggs Initiative. So we have Cleve Jones and we have several women as well, also. Wonderful woman, Gwen Craig, who is very active in No 1 6. And she, again, also has experienced that erasure of being written out of some of the histories. I felt very, very lucky to find somebody who was so to me, the farther back in time I went, the more successful I was. So I met somebody who knew Sally in 1970, and I'm like, yes, this is great. Right when she came to San Francisco. And then I met somebody who met Sally in the early 60s in Texas. So I'm like, this is even better. Then I met somebody and this is all just by luck or guessing or looking in a Rolodex or asking somebody if they knew somebody, if they knew somebody. Then pretty late in the game, we met somebody who was at Sweetbriar College with Sally, class of 52. So she met Sally in 1948. And this woman was a few years younger than Sally. She went to college very young, lives in San Francisco. And the first time I talked to her on the phone, she said, "Oh, I'll come to Berkeley and meet you. I'll just drive over." So she was younger than Sally, so she was only 88. Okay, and had all these wonderful stories and could recreate the story of what it was like to be at a women's college in Virginia in the late 40s and early 50s. And so it really is. And for me, so I grew up just full transparency. I'm a radical lesbian. I live in Berkeley. We're all a bunch of liberal communists. I'm sure that the current administration would probably try to deport us and call us all communists, right? So for me, so eye-opening to talk to folks in Virginia, talk to folks in Texas, talk to somebody who went to women's college in Virginia and talked about one, how constraining it was, two, how liberating it was. It was a women-only space where women were encouraged, women were bright, women were encouraged, women were listened to, and most women then went off and got married right away and young and kind of were tracked. But it was a little period of time for many, many women where they really, in a limited way, could come into their own. So that was a good lesson for me as this Berkeley liberal. You need to open your eyes to people who have different life experiences than you, because you will learn something. Instead of just thinking, oh, all of those women at women's college were all conservative and all, uh, you know, uh, full of, had pots of money. Okay, so that's and all of those things. We felt very, very lucky to be able to meet all of those people who knew Sally for all those many, many years and helped us weave the story together. So the whole story is really meant to be an act of collective storytelling. Okay. And that is something else about the film that you might be interested in, is that we really set it up to be three separate acts. So three parts of the film are actually quite different. And we didn't want to start with her childhood. Even though we knew we wanted to include it as best as we could, we wanted to start with Sally coming to San Francisco because that starts with a bang. That's when people meet the Sally who is just out there, who is fearless, who is ready to stand up to anybody, ready to speak her mind. Okay, so the first part of the film, on maybe 20 minutes or something, really starts with a bang. It's very lively, and you meet Sally at the height of her fame and the height of her powers. Okay, so you meet Sally, who wrote The Wanderground, which was kind of a cult classic lesbian fantasy novel that envisioned sort of a women's utopia. You meet Sally, who was very, very important in fighting the anti-gay Briggs Initiative. You meet Sally, who helped start the Women's Studies Department. And so we kind of, it's more of a traditional biography. You say we are telling you all of the great things this woman did that you should know about. Okay, she really should be recognized for this accomplishment, this accomplishment, this accomplishment, and this accomplishment. But we were very, very convinced from the beginning and became more convinced throughout that we didn't just want to put Sally up on a pedestal. Okay, she had been left out of the Milk film, which was the Hollywood version of the Harvey Milk story. And we wanted to tell people she was important at that place and that time, but we didn't want to lionize her. And we didn't want to say it was only her. Okay. If you watch the Harvey Milk film, you think, well, hardly any women were involved, and it was just a bunch of cute guys that had their shirts off a lot of the time, you know. And so there were men, that campaign was very, very consciously, absolutely mixed men and women. And we just didn't want to make the mistake of lionizing somebody and oversimplifying somebody. So the whole second act of the film, and I don't know if you remember it, but it starts with the three women sitting at the table. We sometimes call them the three oracles. They're all old, old friends of Sally's, very wise. One of them called her a narcissist and later said, well, I kind of take it back. Is we really didn't want to show her as a perfect person. We wanted to show her as this wonderful, dynamic person who was a bundle of contradictions and, sometimes hurt people's feelings and sometimes didn't show up to meetings. And we really, really, in that second part of the film, wanted to show that these changes that made our lives possible as gay people were a collective effort. And Sally was very, very important to that. But she was surrounded by brilliant, badass women who made her life possible, who helped her, who read her speeches, who edited her books, who supported her, who, when she came out to San Francisco, educated her about a more, progressive and forward-looking way of looking at the world. And so that whole second act of the film is through many other women's eyes. So it's not that we don't see Sally, but it's that a lot we hear about her. So we hear about her through her friend Dorothy, who met Sally in Texas, but then was out in California when Sally came out here. And Dorothy was younger than Sally, but brilliant and very, very progressive and political and just, was part of one of the group of women that encouraged Sally, go do it, take that leap of faith. Okay, so we see Sally through Dorothy's eyes and we learn not only was, Sally influenced Dorothy, but Dorothy influenced Sally and Dorothy and her friends, the three oracles. They were the ones that told Sally, go liberate yourself. Okay. And then when Sally came to San Francisco, we see her story largely through the eyes of Jean, who was, and a lot of these women were Sally's lovers at a certain point of time, but a lot of them ended up being lifelong friends. And we see Sally through Jean's eyes, and Jean really helped politicize Sally and introduced her to Clyde Memorial Church, which was, as Jean says, was a hotbed of everything, the women's rights movement, gay rights movement, the Black Panthers were there, and in fact, Reverend Cecil Williams only died recently. He lived into his 90s fighting for social justice. So Sally was surrounded by people who really challenged her and supported her. So we could look at her as somebody who both led the charge for gay rights and women's rights and somebody who herself was transformed and liberated by that movement. So that's what that whole second act was all about, is that it doesn't happen. And some people are behind the scenes. Sally was really good at being up on stage. She loved it. She was, she was charismatic. She was a great speaker. She enjoyed the attention. She enjoyed the accolades. And there's some people who don't want that. And that's okay. They can work. In fact, there were people who didn't even want to be in the film who are very important in Sally's life because they are so much behind the scenes people. And so I think one of the morals we hope that comes out of the films is it's a collaborative effort, and everybody can pitch in whatever way makes sense to them. And the way that worked for Sally was at that certain point in time to be up there on stage and really leading the charge and really inspiring people. She was really could get up on stage and just speak to people in a way that appealed to their heart. And that's the other thing about Sally is that she wasn't academic, but she wasn't because she was such a people person of the people, you know. So now we sort of have women's studies, and if anybody's into women's studies, excuse me, but women's studies is now a recognized discipline. That's wonderful. It's fantastic. There's brilliant people in women's studies, and a lot of ordinary people can't relate to it because it's all in academic jargon. Sally wasn't interested in that at all. She was really interested in communicating very directly with people, and she was also very interested in communicating people with people who are different from her. Okay. And so then, lastly, and then I'll stop and do a quick check-in to see how everybody's doing and whether have people have questions, etc. So the third act of the film is Sally when I met her. So at the end of her life, she is having some physical problems, having cognitive decline, and her women's land community, which had been a whole lot of wonderful friends surrounding her for many, many years, is not doing well. Her best friend Jane died, who had lived, lived right down the road from her. There's only one other woman living on the land. Some people who had planned to move there and retire there hadn't. People had moved away, people had died. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, is there something that went wrong here? Sally's alone. What happened? Did some tragedy happen? And then I realized, no, they had a wonderful, thriving community there for decades. And guess what happened? Life happened. People got older, people died, people moved away. So that was a wonderful community that just had a lifespan. So we wanted, in hopefully a compassionate way, to look at Sally at the end of her life. How did she manage? What were her interests? Who was caring for her? What was happening? And so what we found is that her lesbian community was struggling because of the death of her friend Jane, and that because of Sally's just incredibly expansive, I guess, warm, compassionate, loving personality, Sally, who had been this, radical feminist that said outrageous things, actually had turned out that she had connected with pretty much everybody in her small town, men or women, gay or straight, old or young. And so what we found is a larger community that Sally was able to connect with, and those folks really stepped up to help her at the end of the life of her life. And I felt, we hope that's such a powerful message of the importance of fighting really hard for your rights, which sometimes involves saying really strong things, and the importance of finding ways to connect with people who are different from you, and always being open-minded, always being curious, always being trying to find common ground with people. And so, for example, in the last half of the film, we bring in her friend Vivian, who was her Spanish teacher, who was a straight Puerto Rican woman, who Sally loved, and she adopted them and they adopted her. It was like her straight Puerto Rican family, And then Sally's friend, Margie Handley, was from a logging and ranching family. Well, Sally was an environmentalist. She just thought nobody should ever cut down a tree. And she was very, very liberal, and Margie was very conservative, and they were fantastic friends. And so we felt so happy to be able to interview Margie for the film to show, especially in these polarized times, the importance of people finding ways to connect across differences. So I think and hope that that message of the film, and the longer we worked on this film, the more we felt like this message is more and more timely. We are so divided in this country that people can't are having trouble finding ways to talk to people who are different from them. All of us. I mean, again, I live in Berkeley. I live in a very liberal community. We are at a disadvantage because we're not with people who disagree with us. So we can get very complacent and think we have the right answers. And to me, one of the wonderful things about Sally, and she expresses it in the film, is that she knows she doesn't always have the right answers. So she might speak up and she might be very adamant about what she believes and very strong about what she believes, but she always is willing to listen to somebody who has something else to say, and always willing to do that in a spirit of goodwill and a spirit of, I hope it doesn't sound too corny, but in a loving spirit.
So I put that a great visual of the film was a comparison of the debate footage versus the milk film, and
Yeah.
how like completely off the milk film was. It was ridiculous. And a few questions. What was it like to spend so much time with Sally? It seems like very intimate times.
So Sally was a warm and wonderful person. And she also, by the time I met her, had some challenges. So I just tried to just be with her wherever she was at. She was charming, she was warm, she was wonderful. She was always interested in me or interested in telling stories about her childhood. So I feel very, very lucky and honored to have spent time with her. And also, she was an interesting person because she was very positive. She even said herself, I'm kind of a Pollyanna. She didn't really like to talk about negatives that much. And she was also a bit of a performer. She grew up with her grandmother. Her grandmother would have her perform, tap dances and stuff for her. And I think in some ways, for better or for worse, she felt like she needed to perform to get people to like her. So sometimes I would just tell her, you don't have to perform, or you can just take a break, or I would just wait it out. And so sometimes we'd get the most interesting things by waiting. And so I would have very interesting conversations with her, some on camera and some off camera, where, I'd ask her how things were, and her natural response was, everything's great. And then sometimes if I waited longer, she would say, I'm not a happy camper. This is not how I envisioned. She really had a vision, which is in her book, The Wanderground, that she would die surrounded by this huge circle of friends. And she didn't quite get exactly what she wanted. And so I think somewhere inside of her, there was some sadness, and but on the other hand, so there was some poignancy in spending time with her, but I also end up feeling like her life was such a triumph because she lived a 90-year life where she lived all these different lives, and she really was very, very successful in doing what she wanted to do and living the way she wanted to live. Yeah, so.
Krista said, thank
Sure.
you so much for this film. It was such an important piece of work to honor the whole story of and legacy of an amazing and complicated woman. I'm now extra proud to be an SFSU alum and disappointed that I didn't know anything about Sally Gearhart when I was an undergrad. Another thing I want to say is that I was fascinated to learn about the important theme of patriarchy and how it played out in the context of gay history. I was shocked when I saw the comparison of the actual Milk Gearhart interview with the depiction and erasure portrayed in the Milk movie. A quick question I have is, can you touch upon your process in deciding upon what questions you would ask the three women, the oracles, whose interview was woven in the documentary?
So we had an interview protocol. So we had some standard questions we tried to ask everyone. Like, how did you know Sally? What's your favorite Sally story? So, for example, the story about the Mormons coming to proselytize and Sally goes over to them naked to greet them. That was a response to me saying, "What's your funny Sally story?" to Jean. The oracles, I was most interested. Remember how I was saying earlier, I was really interested when I was interviewing people on hearing from them about periods of time. So those three women were with Sally when she was deciding whether or not to leave Texas. And they were the ones who supported her in leaving Texas. And they all had a summer together in 1970 in Ithaca, where that all happened. So for all of those women, I was asking them specific questions about what happened, what was going on that summer, et cetera. Then one of the women, Dorothy Hacker, knew Sally from Texas, and one of the women knew her from Virginia. So I was also focusing on what happened in Virginia. So one of them, the one who met Sally in summer camp, had actually gone and met Sally's family. So she's the one who said, oh, Miss Maudie was the matriarch. She was the one who was in charge. So again, we were really honing in on, we need, at a certain point when we had enough interviews, we like, okay, it's like a puzzle. Making a film is like putting together a puzzle. We're like, okay, we've got it. San Francisco State, we've got it. We have teachers and we have students. Briggs, we've got it. Okay, Texas, we don't have that yet. Or Virginia, we don't have that yet. So that's what I was focusing on that in that interview with those women. And they just turned out to be that, for a variety of reasons, we filmed all three of them together. And it's not traditional to film people that way, but it turned out to be such a benefit because you can see them interacting with each other. And I don't know if you noticed it, but two of them, the ones on either side, are partners, and the partner on the right is always interrupting the partner on her left because she just finishes her sentences. So that was just an added, and the one on the right swears all the time. So those were both added bonuses that we were lucky to have.
And last two questions. What's been your most surprising lesson about filmmaking as you've made both short and long films, and what is your next project? And then we're going to go ahead and move on to some club business.
Yes. Okay. So the lesson from filmmaking is listen. You have to listen to people, and you have to keep an open mind. You have to just have your feelers out, and as best as you can. You can have a plan for what you're going to do. And that's a good thing, but you have to be ready to veer from that plan because somebody might start telling you something you didn't know about that's critical to the story. And so that's just a very good lesson. I think it was a lesson for me. And I learned to be I used to think I was a good listener. I hope I got a lot better at it. And also just being, trying to, with Sally, that was just a good lesson in compassion as well, as just not just listening, but paying attention to how people are doing, especially because we were interviewing a lot of older people. The other thing I learned from making a film is it is a bitch. It is a huge project. It takes a huge amount of work and money. The Sally film took 6+ years. We had to raise almost $500,000. If I had known that, I probably wouldn't have done it. And so it's good I didn't know. I'm taking a little break, and I have several project ideas. I'm really interested in women's communities. So, for example, I was interested in women's land communities, and I met Sally on women's land communities. There's also all different kinds of women's communities now. There's a retirement community in Florida called Carefree that's like a lesbian community, but they're not radicals. They're just lesbians living their lives in Florida. And so, so I'm very interested in just sort of the way, and I don't just do films about women, by the way. I have several film ideas. One is about other types of women's communities. So there's women's RVing communities and things like that. And so that's what I am looking at. And but I am taking a little bit, at least a teeny bit of a break, because it was exhausting for me and for my wife as well. And fundraising is very, very challenging, as I'm guessing you all know from the work that you do. It's wonderful to hear a little bit about your great work too. So I'd love to be posted. I'm looking for ways to make a positive contribution in these challenging times.